welcome to the MIT System Design and Management Program's Systems Thinking webinar series. My name is Lois Slavin. I'm the Communications Director for STM and the convener of the series. I'm here with our web guru, Stephen DeRocher, and STM alum, Fady Saad. He will be speaking today on, obviously, according to your screen, a systems-based approach to startups, why they fail, and how they can succeed. I would just like to reiterate before we start that, as you can see in the chat section, all registrants will be sent a link within 1 week from today to the presentation slides and the recording, as well as to Fady's contact info. Also, there will be a Q&A at about 12:45. You can enter your questions directly into the chat section at any time during or after the presentation. Please address them to everyone. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Fady.
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. I know for some of you it's early in the morning, for others it's in the afternoon or evening. I was amazed when Louis told me that more than 300 people registered for this webinar, representing almost 30 countries. So this is definitely a great honor for me today to share some of the ideas and the experiences I witnessed over the last few years. So let me start with a very quick story. I think all of us like stories. So this story starts back in 2005, and just a second. Yeah, here we go. So it's a story of a young man, 19 years old, started his first company, did a great job. The company was sold for millions, got lots of publicity, lots of press releases, was interviewed in the TV, and big success in only 19 years old. And then this guy decided that he wanted to start another company, and this company would be mainly focusing on hardware inventions. So basically, it will become a community of inventors. So he created this platform, and this platform called Quirky. I don't know if some of you heard about this company, but until recently, this company has been very, very popular and a great hit in the startup kind of world. So what he was trying to do is basically give an opportunity for people who invent in their own garages to commercialize their technologies and transition it to the market. And basically, people will post ideas they have on a web platform, and then the whole community will vote on these ideas. And basically, the most voted ideas, the company will invest. So Quirky will invest in this idea to design it, to manufacture it, to market it, to even sell it to the market. So the whole 9 yards of commercializing an idea. And basically, Quirky will take 90% of the revenues, and the inventor will take 10% of the returns, and some of that also will be distributed to the community, the people who mainly contributed to kind of refining the idea. Amazing idea, great execution. This guy name is Ben Kaufman. And Ben, he launched Quirky in 2009, and at that time, he was 22 years old. He's a visionary founder, managed to put an amazing team together. He engaged a community of inventors, and the statistics say that the community size was around 1.1 million users. He managed to raise funding. 185 million was raised from who's who in Silicon Valley, Kleiner Perks VC, GE Ventures. So you can imagine big names, lots of connections, lots of experience. Company was doing well, and managed to kind of commercialize some of the interesting products. One of the famous products called Wing, and this was a voice-activated light bulb. They also commercialized a paper-thin Bluetooth speaker, smart air conditioner. So lots of very interesting and very creative ideas. So all of this good, but last year, July 16, 2015, Ben held his last evaluation for ideas that shared on Quirky. And in July, the company laid off the entire New York team. In August 1st, 2015, Ben stepped down, and the CFO of the company assumed leadership. And by September 2015, the company filed for bankruptcy. So, and this is a list of the creditors for Quirky, according to the reporting in last year. So Flextronics, which is a contract manufacturing company, had a credit of more than 18 million. Undercurrent, which is a design consultancy company that Quirky was trying to acquire. So the 14 million is deferred payment that Quirky owned to Undercurrent, and then UPS 1.3 million. So lots of debt. So what went wrong? Now we have a visionary founder, amazing team, previous success, lots of credibility, exceptional board of directors from top VCs in Silicon Valley, great ideas, engaged community, lots of traction, 1.1 million users. So what went wrong? So this is the webinar for webinar outline for today. I'm planning to speak about startup failure. What's the problem? Is there a problem that we should discuss, or and if there is a problem, why this is a significant problem? And second, I will focus on a different perspective looking at startups. I mean, there has been lots of books, lots of studies, lots of blogs, webinars around entrepreneurship and startups, and amazing ideas that I continuously learn from. But I still believe that a fundamental concept which is missing from the whole startup kind of literature and startup community is looking at startups as complex systems. And we will discuss why this is important in understanding and solving some of the problems that startups face. The last point, which I'm sure that most of you are very excited to hear about, is what are the key external and internal reasons for startups to fail. So what are these reasons? And what can we do to kind of minimize the risk related to some of those reasons? So let's start this the discussion. So looking at statistics from the U.S. Department of Labor, these are data from 1994 to 2010, looking at the survival rates of companies. And the main conclusion out of this graph is by the second year of the start of a company, 80% of companies survive. So 20% would fail and 80% would still be operational. By the fifth year, 50% of the companies will fail. By the 10th year, 35% of the companies will survive and the remaining would fail. By the 15th year, only 28% would still be around. So this is the conclusion of this graph, which means that by the fifth year of the life of a company, the chances are 50-50 that this company will be still around. Then this is another graph looking at the number of startups or new companies that has less than 1 year old created in the U.S., again, from the same period, 1994 to 2010. And as you can see, there has been an increase, a gradual increase until 2001, and then we had sudden increase from 2003 to 2006, and then we are currently experiencing a dramatic decline in the number of startups that are formed. The third graph is looking at the percentage of employment, so comparing large companies versus small to medium-sized companies, so how much people those companies employ. And as you can see, again, there is an interesting trend here. So in 1996, the split was almost 50-50. So the whole workforce was split 50-50 between large companies and small to medium-sized companies, right? And then we see that now large companies are employing more people and startups are employing more and more less people. And we can correlate this with the previous graph, which is about the number of startups being formed in the U.S. And as many of you know, the startups and small businesses in general is the engine for the economy. So if we are having a declining number of small companies or startups being formed in the economy, this is a very alarming fact. And it's worth lots of attention and finding quick ways to kind of invert this kind of trend. And finally, this is the last graph from the Department of Labor that shows that the jobs created by small companies or startups. Again, as you can see, a very decreasing trend starting from 2000 until 2010. So, of course, the economic crisis that happened in 2008 contributed to magnify this trend, but this trend has been on since 2000. So we cannot say that this is mainly due to the economic crisis. So there has been trend in the number, there has been a decrease in the number of people being employed by startups. So basically, the message is the number of people that we can employ in startups has been decreasing more and more. So now we're moving at why is it important to look at startups as complex systems? So I believe that our mental model for looking at problems and structuring problems is very important, because the way we understand the problem contributes to a great extent to the way we find ways to solve this problem. So if our mental model, if our understanding of a problem is flawed, the chances is very slim that we will find the right solution for it. So I believe that we need to look at startups from a different perspective, and we need to look at a system-like kind of approach. And I would compare the system approach to the traditional kind of separate functions view to a startup or a company. So the traditional view is you would look at a company or a startup as a collection of functions. So basically you have the product development function, you have the sales and marketing, you have the manufacturing, you have the customer support, you have the management and so forth, the human resources, legal, accounting. So these are all functions. And the traditional view that these are functions that kind of work together to make the company successful. But the reality is it's much more complex than that. So underneath the functional view, there is lots of complexity involved. And one way to kind of visualize this kind of complexity, I tried to do some of that during my research at the system design program here. And going through lots of studies and looking at different kind of research that have been done on organizations and management, and speaking with lots of entrepreneurs and investors too, I came to the conclusion that we can kind of model a startup by having mainly 4 sectors. So the first sector is the people or the employee sector, and this basically is a sector that focuses on the dynamics around hiring people, the turnover, whether people leave the company or they are laid off, the core team or the founding team strength, the job attractiveness or the firm attractiveness, how attractive is the company for people to work in, the burnout, do we make a good balance between life and work balance so people are not burned out, they have enough space to re-energize and kind of charge their energy. Psychological ownership of the company, do people feel that they are part of the company and they own it? And also the productivity. You could have people employed in the company, but the productivity that you are getting from those people is 20% or 50% or 60%. So this is also very, very important. So this is the first sector. The second sector has to do with the product development, or of course, if it's a service company, the service development. So this has to do with the the features that you are developing, how frequent you phase out some features, how frequent you add features, also how quick you can develop those features and how much will it cost you. Also, it has to do with the service quality. So do you provide customer support, customer service quality after you sell the products? And also, how attractive is the product? Does it meet a need in the market or not? And if it meets this need, is it superior to other alternatives or other products in the market? And also the value proposition, like what exactly the value that you provide to the customers? Is it, are you solving the problem in a quick way, in a more cost-effective way, or in a totally kind of radical or disruptive way? So what's the value proposition that you have? So this is the second sector. The third sector, as you might expect, is all about sales and marketing. So after you put together the people you have and you develop the product or the service, are you really able to sell and market this product or service? And the key metrics here is the number of customers that you will have, and how long you can keep those customers. Are they churning or they are staying as loyal customers for you? Also, what's the sales cost? So a key metrics in any startup is the CAC, the customer acquisition cost. How much does it cost you to actually acquire customers? This is a very important matrix. And also another matrix is the LTV, the long time value. So if you spend money and resources to acquire a customer, how much value that you can generate out of this customer over the life cycle or the lifetime of this customer. So this has to do with different business models, subscription models, additional kind of features that people will buy, additional accessories. So a very important matrix. Another thing that's very related to the product quality and the company attractiveness is word of mouth. Does the company and the product have the right reputation and the right image, the right perception? And do you have this snowball effect that people will love your product and love your company, and then they will start actually do the marketing on your behalf? And this is a very powerful kind of stage that any company could reach to, that actually your customers will become your marketeers. Another important aspect in this sector is the pricing. So how do you structure your pricing? There are different techniques for pricing. I mean, you can sell the product, you can lease it, you can have a subscription model, you could have a freemium model, so you offer the basic features for free, and then you start charging for premium features. All sorts of pricing models. There is also the kind of the Gillette pricing model. I mean, you sell the shaving machine at a very low price, and then actually all the profits you are making from the blades. So this is the kind of like decoupled kind of pricing model. And also the unit cost. So how much will it cost you to produce this product or to provide the service? Are you able to optimize the manufacturing cost and the development cost so that at the end of the day you have a profitable product? The last sector is the most obvious and the most kind of talked about sector in any company, which is the financials. One quote I once read about money is, money is like oxygen for companies. It's necessary for the company to live, but it's not the reason the company is living for. So I think this is a very important aspect. I mean, companies who are living mainly to kind of make money and trying to kind of exploit their customers, try to squeeze money out of them, usually they would have a short-term success, but it wouldn't be a long-term success in the market. So cash is important, definitely, but it's very hard to kind of unify a large team around the vision of making money only. So here you have cash, the net income, which is obviously a direct output from the previous sector about the unit cost and the pricing that you will have. External funding, how much money you'd be able to raise, whether from seed funders, incubators, angel investors, venture capitalists, or other sources of funding. And how your company is valued. So what's the value of your company? And there are different techniques for the valuation of companies. Could be based on cash, could be based on comparables, so how this company is compared to other players in the market. It could be based on the amount of money you raised. So there are different techniques for firm valuation, but at the end of the day, I mean, this is an area that negotiation plays a big role in. And next is the compensation, how you structure your compensation for the founders and for the rest of the team. Very important because it's one of the core things in the way you make the company attractive. And finally, the stocks and ownership. So what are the stock pools that you will have? How much equity you will give to the founders to make sure that they are committed and keep providing lots of energy and lots of motivation for the rest of the company. So those are, I would say, to a great extent, covers probably 90% of anything that you will think about in startup dynamics. Of course, there are lots of other details, but I would say that those are the core things that you can think about in any company. But this is not everything. It's very important also to look at the ecosystem that the company will be working on. So what's the environment? What's the market? What's the kind of government regulations out there? So, so this is a list of external factors. I compiled this list from looking at the World Bank reports, the World Economic Forum reports, and also the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor reports. They provide lots of indices and lots of factors that impact any entrepreneurship ecosystem or the success of small businesses in a certain geography. And basically, I looked at those different factors and kind of shortlisted the key most important kind of factors that kept kind of showing up in studies and reports. So we will get into more details about these external factors. But basically, as you can see, this is a way to simplify. When we speak about a startup, what do we mean exactly? And I think this is what we mean. We mean those four sectors and the external factors. One note I want to mention here is some of the interesting concepts and systems is that behavior is a function of structure. So no matter how much we try to solve behavior kind of results or outcomes, if we keep the structure as is, the structure will keep generating the same behaviors over and over. Another key insight from taking a system approach to look at startups is the whole idea of emerging properties. So an emerging property is a property that we cannot plan for, we cannot design for, and we cannot forecast. It's something that will emerge from the interplay of different factors. Many of the things that we are having a hard time defining is, in essence, an emergent property. So take, for example, culture. What's culture? It's very hard to define culture because it's a mix of lots of things. And I believe that culture is one of those emergent properties. You cannot design for the culture. You cannot predict the culture. You can just put the main components, the main elements, and you would hope that the right culture will emerge out of those components. One key insight also I learned during the research is the effect of delays. So in any complex systems, there are lots of delays, and cause and effect is not very obvious. So you could do something now, but you will actually see the effect of this decision 5–10 years from today. In large companies, this is not very critical because large companies, they are mature, they are established, they can afford mistakes. Of course, to some extent. Not everyone can afford doing lots of mistakes. But small companies cannot afford these kind of mistakes because you make a decision and the impact will either make you successful or will kill you. I have the pleasure to work in different companies, in different industries, and also different sizes. So I spent 8 years working at Siemens in North Africa and Middle East. And Siemens is a huge company, very well established, lots of amazing, very talented people, lots of products, but also lots of processes, lots of structures, lots of things that the company gained over the years that helped to a great extent stabilize the operations and the kind of financial performance of the company. I also started my own company, ePowerhouse, from the ground up, and I have seen what would it take to start a company from scratch, and what would it mean to make a few bad decisions or bad selections for a team, for example. So also looking at small-sized company, and also working at Vecna, which is a medium-sized company around 300 employees, I managed to kind of complete the whole spectrum of like small companies to large companies, and now looking at a medium-sized company, how the dynamics would differ and the kind of the tolerance that the company would have for some of the decisions. So one of the key conclusions is once we start looking at internal and external success factors, it's very important not to look at the symptoms, but try to zoom in into the root causes, because this will simplify what are the important things that we should be focusing on, what are the leverage points in the startup system that we should be focusing on. So this is just this is the actual model that I simplified to the previous one, but this is how the actual model looks like, and this is built using a modeling technique called system dynamics, one of the best ways to model and simulate complex systems. I mean, this will be in the slides, so I'll leave it up to you to kind of dig more into the details of it. So, so now we've finished the first 2 points, which is what's the kind of the startup failure kind of problem, and the second one is looking at startups from a system perspective. And now we are moving to the last point, and probably the core point that most of you is kind of keen to listen to, which is what are the key internal success factors. So during my research, so this is a mix of, I would say, scientific, academic research, and my own personal professional experience over the last 10 years. So during my research, I looked at studies that looked at key success factors in startups, and those studies, they lasted over 10 years, and they looked at around 11,000 companies from different countries, the U.S., Pakistan, Croatia, Chile, Egypt, and different countries. So a very comprehensive study, not only one study, but multiple studies actually. And I looked at the conclusion of each study, and they of course use different terminologies. And I tried to take these kind of factors and try to map it to the startup system that I developed previously. And it came down to 5 key factors. The first one and the most cited one is the founding team strength. The more strong the founding team, the higher the chances that the startup will win. And what do we mean by that? We mean the kind of education that the founding team got. And this is not about the knowledge, it's about the networks and about the connections and the alumni network that they are plugged into. It's also about the diversity of the team. Is there a good balance between technical folks and business folks? It's also about the complementary. So even if we are having 2 technical founders, are they complementing each other? For example, if it's a robotics company, is one person focusing on hardware and the other one is focusing on software? So they are complementing each other. And the outcome of these kind of factors, of course, make the founding team able to kind of recruit mentors, also raise funding, and basically they will have the credibility to go out and pitch to investors, and investors will trust them with their money. So if you are starting a company, you need to look carefully at your team. You need to spend enough time. You need to do your due diligence. And I mean, I cannot stress it more. I mean, it's very, very, very important. And one personal experience I have is one of the initiatives that we started 2 years ago is Mass Robotics, which is a robotics innovation hub in Massachusetts. And because the founding team was an A+ team and very connected from Vecna, from Draper Labs, from the Mass Technology Leadership Council, we managed to put together an amazing board of directors from industry leaders and VCs and very experienced people in robotics and co-working spaces. So this is just an example of what a strong founding team can bring to the table. The second thing is the firm attractiveness, and this is about how attractive is your companies for customers to buy and for people to work there. So just think about Google and Amazon. I mean, they have the privilege to look at the best talents in the world. And basically, there's a talent war between those companies trying to get as many talented people as they can. So how do you work on that? Part of it is out of your control. Basically, it's about the perception that you portray and the kind of image and reputation. It's basically who you are. I mean, it's very hard to kind of fake that. But also, people worked on that using the press, using PR activities, being involved in university events, entrepreneurship events, and working on cool things. So these are some of the things that will improve the firm attractiveness. The next one is the product quality. So if you have an amazing founding team and your company is very attractive, but at the end of the day, you produce products that suck, I mean, it's no good. I mean, people wouldn't buy, and eventually, speaking about the cause and effect kind of delays, eventually this will impact the company attractiveness. So does your product meet an actual need in the market? Has it done something that no one have done before? And does it really kind of appeal to the customers? So think of the iPhone. Think of the Google search. these are products that manage to not only fulfill a need and perform very well, but also it captured the love and the affection of their own customers. So so the product quality is very important. Is there a product market fit? So do you have the right product for the right market? Many startups do the mistake of developing an amazing product, but then they go out and sell it for different markets. One example I can kind of highlight from the robotics industry, iRobot. iRobot managed to commercialialize one of the most successful robotics products in the market now, which is the Roomba, which is basically a robotic vacuum cleaner. No one thought that a company would come up with this idea, but iRobot did it. And basically, they managed to find the product market fit, how they can fit the technologies they have into a specific market segment. The next one is the service quality. So after you produce this high quality product, can you provide the right service afterwards? Do you have the right organization to provide customer service? Do you know how to do it? Are you responsive enough? And this becomes particularly important when companies start scaling. Many times companies scale without paying enough attention to scaling the customer support kind of team. One personal experience I had is using Uber, which is a very successful company, not only in the US, but in many parts of the world. And basically, Uber is a mobile app that you can use to get taxis or cars and basically transport you from one place to the other. So one time I was using Uber here in Boston, and I checked the invoice later on, and I found that there was an error. The destination was incorrect. The whole thing was incorrect, and was charging me much more than I expected. So I was a little bit surprised, but I sent them an email saying that this is not correct. And probably in the same day, I got a feedback saying that, yes, we know that this is an error, and we are refunding the whole thing. And they didn't even charge me for the original trip. So this is just an example of a very quick response, courtesy to your customers, and really make them happy. The last thing is the delay between your product development and your sales and marketing. Can you quickly iterate on your product? And this is actually one of the most cited kind of reasons for the failure of Quirky. So one of the objectives that Quirky had was commercializing 50 products per year. This is a huge number. I mean, this is against physics law. I mean, it's very hard for any company to commercialize 50 products per year. I mean, commercializing 1 or 2 products a year is already a stretch. And the reason for that is the story does not end by having the product out to the market. I mean, you need to iterate on the product. You need to get your customers' feedback. You need to improve on the product. You need to optimize on the manufacturing costs. You need to optimize on the distribution channels. There are lots of things that you will need to work on until you reach the stability stage. And this takes lots of time, especially if you are speaking about hardware products or consumer products, or robotics, hardware and software. So very important, this kind of short delay between the product development and the sales and marketing. Another example from Uber, when Uber Pool, when Uber launched their pool function, which is basically you can pool with other riders in the same car. I used this function, and it just took too long because usually you would request, and then you will wait until they would find another person to kind of pool with you, and I mean the wait time was just long, and I stopped using it. And then somehow a friend told me the Uber Pool is amazing. They relaunched the function, and check it out. So I went there and I tried it again, And they changed the process. Instead of you waiting for them to find another rider, they will actually get you the car, and while the car in the way to pick you up, or while you are riding in the car, they will look for other people, so you don't have to wait. So this kind of quick attention to small details, and of course this is not an easy thing to keep an eye on customer kind of usage and feedback, and have all the kind of analytics kind of infrastructure to see how people are interacting and using your platform. So those are the top 5 internal success factors. And I mean, I looked around in blogs and different books, and you will find lots of other reasons cited. I mean, for example, I mean, many VCs, they say that running out of cash is one of the main reasons. Yes, I mean, this is correct, but I think that this is a symptom of a root cause, and the root cause will come from one or two of these factors. So I would claim that those are the 5 root causes for a startup failure from the internal perspective. But we cannot blame it all on the internal dynamics. There is also the external factors. So you could have an amazing company, amazing product, and everything is perfect. But what about the geography? What about the ecosystem that you are working in? The U.S. is very fortunate because, I mean, it's probably one of the top companies in the top countries in the whole world, creating more and more startups and lots of innovation. But the story is not the same in different countries. I mean, coming from the Middle East, I have seen this firsthand. I also worked extensively in Europe, and I can relate to the differences in the culture and lots of different dynamics. So I looked, as I said, I looked at reports from the World Bank and Global Entrepreneurship Monitor and World Economic Forum, and also had the pleasure to consult with the World Bank for a brief period of time, basically looking at how certain countries manage to implement entrepreneurship and economic development policies. So looking at all of that, and also using the system dynamics model I developed for a startup, I kind of compared the results of the model to these kind of reports and studies. And here's a list of the 4 key factors, external factors that I found. So the first one is institutions. So this has to do with the institutions in the country. Or in your geography. This is related to the rule of the law. This is related to law enforcement. This is related to protection of intellectual property. Financial also kind of measures in place. Are there enough measures and enough policies and enough laws in the country that kind of organize and mitigate the relationship between different stakeholders or not? The second one, which is I think is a very major factor, is the fear of failure. So actually in the U.S., I mean, the U.S. managed to build a culture around encouraging even failure. So the whole mantra of failing fast. But in other countries, failure is a sign of kind of lack of credibility, and it's basically it's a bad thing if you fail and if you file for bankruptcy. And of course, I mean, this prevents many people from taking risks and trying again, and basically it kind of impacts to a great extent the founding team, and also attracting young people to join your startup because they are afraid of being associated with a failing company if the whole thing fails. So I think it's very important, whether on a local kind of communities, national communities, encouraging this culture of embracing fail. I mean, fail is fine as long as people are learning and developing out of these kind of experiences. Third one is labor market efficiencies. And again, this is about having the right talent and being able to employ the right talent. Is there the right labor laws in place? One of the key ideas that have been discussed for some time is the non-compete kind of laws. So Massachusetts is very famous for having non-compete laws that prevent the mobility of employees from one company to the other, while California, for example, doesn't have these kind of non-compete laws, which of course encourage more and more mobility and kind of cross-pollination from one company to the other. So the whole ease of mobility of labor and finding the right talent. The last one is the market size and the industry that you are in. So very important, because if you are solving a problem for a very, very, very small market, probably you wouldn't be able to make a big success out of that, because yes, it's a problem, but the market is very small, which means that you cannot generate lots of revenues, and we cannot scale, and all these kind of related problems. So it's very important when you are thinking about the problem that you want to solve is this a large enough problem or not, and can you validate that? Is it a vitamin or an aspirin? Meaning, is it a good-to-have thing, or it's an aspirin? It's a pressing need. And in a recent study done by CB Insights, which is an investment kind of research company, they did the research on 156 failed startups, and they found that 45% of those companies, they failed because of lack of market need. A very huge problem. So please, when you think about the problem you want to solve, think about the market size and also the industry that you are in. I worked in telecommunication, which is a very mature industry and very kind of established players, and actually there's lots of mergers and acquisitions, lots of consolidation in the market, and it's very hard to come up with major disruption there. I also, my startup was focusing on the web and internet space, social space, which is kind of peaking now, and there are lots of players, but we don't have yet kind of dominant players, although we have Facebook and we have LinkedIn, but still there's room for innovation there. And I also worked in robotics, and robotics is, I would say it's a very young industry now. I mean, the AI technologies, the driverless cars, all the mobile robotics platforms. So it's a very young industry, and it has a huge potential for investment and growth. So this is just, I mean, kind of examples of different industries that you can think about. Of course, some of the evolving industries now is the Internet of Things, the wearables, and much more. So I finished kind of the information or the ideas that I wanted to share with you. And in summary, startups do fail, and it's a huge percentage of companies that fail, and this has a dramatic impact on the economy and the job creations. The mental model that we have about startups is very important. So looking at startups as a complex system, not as separate functions, is very important. And the whole emerging properties and delays and these kind of ideas are very important when we look at a startup. And we saw together that there are mainly 4 sectors in any startup: the employees, the product development, the customers, and the financials. And we discussed 5 internal success factors and 4 external success factors for any startup. So all of that is good, and I think for those of you who want to start their own companies, I think this is a very good starting point that you can use while you are kind of thinking about your companies, while you are structuring your business models and looking at the markets that you want to target. But a personal vision that I have is humanity over the years, we accumulated lots of knowledge and lots of ideas about the way we design, the way we build companies, and the way we scale companies. And I think we reach a stage now where we can codify this knowledge in a more structured, more easy to use kind of platforms that will make it easy for inexperienced entrepreneurs to build their companies and minimize the risk for them to fail. So this is a personal vision, and I think that with the increase in using artificial intelligence and deep learning kind of technologies, eventually this will happen, that we will have intelligent kind of organizations or smart startups. I will stop here. I know that we want to get some questions. I thank you very much for attending and for listening. It has been a pleasure interacting with every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Fady. This was terrific. I got an unusual number of social media feedback, tweets and things like that, so bravo. Folks, I would just like to remind you we have about 10 minutes left for Q&A. If you have any questions or comments, please enter them directly into the chat section addressed to everyone. And I will then read each one aloud in the order in which they are received. Here is a comment that you may want to comment on, Fady. It's from Tom Simon, who writes, excellent presentation. I embrace systems thinking as well. In the ecosystem, it seems to me the actual environment, think climate change, would seem to me to be an affecting consideration on any, it says strat up, maybe that's strategy up in the 21st century. I can repeat that if you'd like.
Yeah,
if you'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, if you can repeat, I'm not sure.
Sure. In the ecosystem, it seems to me that the actual environment would be an affecting consideration on any strategy in the or any startup. Excuse me, I get it now. There was that was misspelled. Startup in the 21st century. So he's essentially asking if climate change is something that will impact a startup in the 21st century.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very honest. I didn't study the kind of the effect of the environment, the actual kind of environment and the climate change on the creation of startups. I didn't spend enough time looking at that. But I would expect that this will be kind of integrated with the external or the ecosystem kind of factors I discussed. So it could have an impact on the infrastructure, it could have an impact on the kind of macro kind of economic factors. But as you have seen, I mean, out of 13 major kind of ecosystem factors, only 4 are the kind of the leverage points. Those are the ones that startups are very sensitive to. So if we are going to focus, if you are a policy maker, or if you are a leader in your ecosystem or your country looking at improving entrepreneurship and encouraging more and more startups to succeed, those 4 leverage points are the starting point. Those are the most important ones. Entrepreneurs manage to find ways to overcome infrastructure problems. Like, I mean, I can relate, for example, in Egypt, there is lots of infrastructure problems. I mean, the internet is very slow. It's very hard to move from place to the other because of traffic. So these are all kind of infrastructure problems. However, we have been seeing a trend of very successful startups coming out of Egypt and the Middle East. And lots of investments have been done there. So infrastructure is not one of those leverage points.
Okay, thank you. From Laureen, who says, great presentation, thank you. Will there be any further reference reading you would suggest?
So, yeah, so actually, in the last slide in my presentation, I have a link here to my full thesis. I don't know if is it still online? No. I didn't check it. So anyway, on the slides that Lewis will be sharing later on, the last slide that has my contacts, and it also has a link to the full thesis. And there's a list of all the references I used. I would highly encourage you to go and check these kind of references, and I mean, from the World Bank reports to other kind of studies done on startup dynamics. So I think this is a good list to start from, and I'll be happy to help in any way. I mean, you have my email and my contact, so feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to support in any way.
Okay, from Tyler Hodge, who asks, Fady, you mentioned at the end that we may be able to use intelligence, i.e., the amount of data out there, to make good or bad decisions for startups. Where would we get this data to make informed decisions?
Amazing question. So I would say that there are two sets of data. So there is the historical data about the performance of other startups in the past. So, I mean, Facebook, Google, Uber, Quirky. So there's lots of data out there. Some of the, I mean, CB Insights, which is the investment research company I mentioned, they have some data sets. There is also lots of data sets at the World Bank. There is also lots of data sets at the Department of Labor, where I pulled some of the statistics I showed today. So there are some data out there about the historical kind of performance of companies. But we can draw some conclusions out of this, but I think the more important data sets is how we can build a system that can continuously pull real-time data about a current startup and making sense of this data and help on the management of this company and the decisions that the founders will do.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of more minutes and a couple of more questions. For those of you who need to sign off, just a reminder that there will be a link sent to all registrants within about a week to the webinar recording and the slides. You will also receive Fady's contact information again at that time. I'd also like to invite you to the next MIT SDM Systems Thinking webinar, which will be 2 weeks from today, and it will cover new approaches to cyber security, and that will be delivered by Dr. Charles Ihigwara, who is an SDM alum and a world-class expert in this area. Back to the last two questions. One is from Paul Kirkham, who says, in an environment of weak IP protection, what strategies are available for a startup faced with much larger and better resourced competition?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. In an environment of weak IP protection, what strategies are available for a startup faced with much larger and better resourced competition?
Yeah. Yeah, I know this is tricky, but I will share with you my experience and what I know about IP protection. So, first of all, IP protection is a defensive strategy. So basically, if you are a startup and you invest the money and the time to get an IP protection, it's basically to defend yourself against large companies, which is very related to your question. But also, there are different techniques and there are different ways to do that. But at the end of the day, it's all about execution because many people can come up with ideas, but very few actually execute on those ideas. And many companies would avoid going into legal kind of litigation to kind of sue another company for infringing their patents. And usually companies will kind of try to reach an agreement, whether it's licensing, whether it's acquisition of certain patents. It's an interesting kind of dynamics, and I'll be happy to discuss this more with you offline.
Okay, and we are running out of time. There's a wonderful question from Mark Tomizawa, who writes, I founded and ran Smash Advertising, a multicultural-based strategy and execution company. I have used the MTV launch organizational structure worldwide since 1987 to launch media-driven brands, channels, networks, and markets, business to business, and B2C and C2C. He wants to know who might fund this. Now, given that we have we're over time, I'm wondering if you might have a short answer, if you might want to take this offline.
Yeah, I'll take it offline.
Okay.
Feel free to reach out to me either by email or LinkedIn. I'll be happy to continue the discussion.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for the question, Mark. And last question is from Juliet Foster. How do you see the smart startup concept impacting the currently declining job creation?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. This is one of my kind of personal passions. And I think if we have this kind of smart platform for creating companies and reducing the chances for failure, I think we can create more and more successful companies, and if we have more and more successful companies, those companies will offer more and more job opportunities. I was actually chatting with a friend of mine last night about the webinar, and she mentioned that thinking about Steve Jobs and how one person created thousands, probably millions of job opportunities, not only in the U.S., but worldwide. Because he had the vision, he had the skills, and he managed to build a successful company. So I think I think the starting point is finding way to build successful companies that will offer more and more job opportunities for lots of people worldwide.
Wonderful. Fady, thank you very much for a brilliant webinar. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. We hope you'll join us for our next webinar on cybersecurity 2 weeks from today. And feel free to reach out for Fady. And again, we will be sending a link to the slides and the recording in about a week. Have a great day, everyone.